It's my pleasure to welcome a Balsillie Scholar who's with us for these summer months, Dr. Bo Kelestyn. The Balsillie Scholar Program brings scholars and industry professionals from around the world to research this intersectional area between technology and policy and governance. So we have a number of Balsillie scholars at the school this summer researching topics like AI governance, epidemic simulation, green hydrogen governance, human-centered digital governance, fintech, and of course the topic today, which is the governance of technology that's been used in Ukraine by way of an app called Diia. It's intrigued the world. In fact, many Western countries are using Ukraine for leadership in this area, thought leadership, and also practical and operational leadership by getting them in for consultancy purposes. This was already in train before the unfortunate conflict, which is still plaguing Ukraine, very sadly. But the acceleration of the digitalization of the Ukrainian government is a case study indeed, which Bo will share her thoughts on with us today. So the talk today is entitled Human-Centered Digital State, the Case of Ukraine. And this is a second in our summer Balsillie Scholar research series. And let me just give you a bit of biographical background on Bo. She is a design thinking academic and practitioner with a very diverse teaching and consulting portfolio. She works as an associate professor and a course director for the MSc in Management of Information Systems and Digital Innovation at the Warwick Business School, University of Warwick in the UK. So outside of academia, Bo is an innovation consultant and has worked with the Guardian Masterclasses as their lead design thinking masterclass tutor. She works with and has been working with the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine on researching the case of the digital government ecosystem named Diia. So, Bo, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining the school, full stop, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anne. It's a pleasure to be here today. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy summer schedule. So I'll be sharing, as I said, a little bit of a glimpse of the case, a little bit of an introduction to design thinking and human-centered design, and talking a bit about some of the outputs that folks can expect as a result of me spending some time with the school. So before I get into the case itself, I just wanted to invite people to play a little experiment. If I can get you to get your smartphones out, I know you're all enjoying the lovely catering today, and just access your passport through your phone, through your government app. Just for a Ukrainian, that is dead easy.
I can't access the passport.
What about
I didn't know we could.
your tax records?
Oh, I do know how to do that.
I can do that
Very
through a browser.
complicated. Yeah. Bank record or tax record.
And what about your driving license?
I scanned it.
If anyone can do it, it will be.
And what about filing for a marriage license or registration?
Nobody's that foolish.
You say that. These are just some of the services accessible from a smartphone through an app or Diia to every Ukrainian citizen. Sadly, I'm not a Ukrainian resident, so I don't have all of the features, but I can access all of my documents, registrations. I can file for a marriage license. I can even propose through Diia and get engaged through Diia. I can, among some of the key features that people use quite regularly, register a business through the app. I can pay my taxes and file my taxes through the app. And of course, in the context of the full-scale invasion, apply for a reimbursement if any of my properties were destroyed, or for instance, report any suspicious activity of the enemy across all parts of the country. So these are just some of the services that are accessible to us at a click of a button, all thanks to the government ecosystem that is Diia. So what does Diia mean? So it's this kind of big word that we're using a lot. So Diia has a double meaning. And I'm really interested in kind of how people came up with this. Actually, what I've learned is that it was a bit of an accident having this double meaning, but I think it's just really beautiful, even if it was created by accident. So Diia in Ukrainian means action, to take action, right? And then the acronym itself, Diia, stands for Держава Я, which means the state and me. So it beautifully describes this idea of taking action with regards to services and kind of engaging with the government, but it also speaks about that relationship, about that human centricity of what this app and what this service actually represents. And obviously I'm biased. As a Ukrainian, I think it's such a great ecosystem, but don't just take my word for it. So why the case of Diia is so interesting for us is because if we look at some of the fastest growing companies in the world, all of these big names that all of you guys will know, regardless of where in the world you come from, this is how long it took these services to get to its first million of users, right? Netflix, 3.5 years, Airbnb, 2.5 years, Facebook, 10 months, Instagram, 2.5 months, ChatGPT, 5 days. Diia got its first million user in 4 days. So with regards to some of these kind of speedy stories of scaling of digital transformation and digital innovation, Diia is a really interesting case of how quickly the government has been able to onboard that amount of people. And of course, as the years went by, more and more of these kind of awards and recognitions have started to creep up. So at the moment, Ukraine is 5th in the world in terms of the level of development of its digital public services, only beaten by the Republic of Korea, Denmark, Estonia, who has been a major partner for Ukraine in terms of the development of the app. And there's a lot of knowledge exchange that's happening, has happened and continues to happen with the government of Estonia. And also Ukraine's beaten by Saudi Arabia as well. So we're definitely seeing a kind of Ukraine being named the European digital tiger through the success of the app of Diia. Some of the other things that make it really distinctive, so things like having the first digital passport in the world that's equivalent to the paper. So if in Ukraine you were stopped, let's say, by the police, or you wanted to access a particular service, you didn't have your paper passport with you, showing the Diia equivalent has exactly the same legal power. So if you imagine a situation of the full-scale invasion, people being displaced, people are moving across the country, some people may have lost their documents in fire or explosion, or just for other factors, maintaining that resilience, being able to continue interacting with the state and with the government services, this app played a huge role and continues to play a huge role. 4th in the world, digital driving license, 4th in Europe, digital driving license, again, fully digital through the app. We don't necessarily need to carry the plastic equivalent anymore. 91% of newborns in Ukraine get registered with Diia straight away, so parents can start accessing different services and different benefits for the children through the app as well. And we currently hold the record for the world's fastest business registration, and it's under 10 minutes. I think an average is about 2, if I'm not mistaken. So it's super, super quick. You can register a business at a click of, again, a button, 2 or 3 clicks. So I have some stats here as well in terms of where the usage is now. I've obviously said that Diia got its first million in only 4 days. These are a little bit dated now, but still gives you kind of a scale in terms of the growth, particularly since the full-scale invasion. So on the 24th of February, which is when Russia invaded Ukraine, 14.6 million users were in the app. So obviously we talk a lot about the success of Diia and its significance to the resilience, but actually the growth started much further and before. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of those key factors as well. And the kind of the latest milestone that we've celebrated is 20 million users in the app as of 25th of January 2024. So again, you're seeing again how many people have also transitioned onto the app since the full-scale invasion, which hasn't sort of dampened any of that progress at all. To give you an idea of what the whole ecosystem encompasses, so we obviously have a portal, so not everyone has an app, right? You've got to make sure the service is accessible. Many people also access these services through a browser, through a computer. There's obviously an app as well. We also have a Diia education branch of the ecosystem, which is a platform that shares a number of different strands of educational content, things like cybersecurity, for example, digital literacy of some of the kind of big hitters, short courses that people can access for free through the ecosystem to upskill and boost their understanding of different topics. Diia City is a separate, really fascinating case in and of itself. It's a very unique tax and legal framework that allows a number of global brands and companies to be e-residents in Ukraine and benefit from the kind of beneficial support and the ecosystem from the government around scaling their businesses. So companies like Revolut, for example, or Visa are all e-residents in Ukraine and are part of this Diia City ecosystem. Diia Engine, which is a low-code open source a kind of opportunity to get access to the different backend parts of the Diia. And actually, Diia is fully open source now, or well, I wouldn't say fully, but there are huge parts of it that are open source that allow different governments, different organizations to understand and learn from that experience. And of course, Diia Business, which is another kind of comprehensive ecosystem in and of itself that allows to support the growth and development of businesses in Ukraine of different sizes. So again, it's about support, it's about education content, it's about getting legal advice, tax advice, IP advice, things like that. So again, when Ukrainians talk about Diia, for an average citizen, it is about those driving license and passports, registrations, taxes, things like that. But actually, it's a much, much bigger, comprehensive ecosystem that talks to each other and works with each other. And underneath this kind of people and technology structure, we also have a very important legal underpinning. This is where I think the scholars and folks here will start perking up. Ukraine's parliament is called Verkhovna Rada, right? So you'll see it represented with this blue little, I'm not blocking the screen for colleagues in the room. By the way, we'll share the screen, the slides as well if anyone can't read because the fonts are quite small. So this is the kind of digital legislation part of Diia's functioning and Diia's growth and scaling, right? So Verkhovna Rada passes those laws. And there is a particular committee on digital transformation that particularly looks after what is happening with Diia and supports and pushes through various legislation that allows for things to function and grow and work in the way it does. And then we also have this executive power, which is driven by the Prime Minister. We're just as we're speaking, there's a lot of changes of government in Ukraine that's happening at the moment. And underneath the Prime Minister, we have the Vice Prime Minister, who at the moment in Ukraine is also Mikhailo Fedorov, who's kind of the key person behind digital transformation of Ukraine. He's the Prime Minister responsible for science, education, innovation, and technology, but he's also the Minister of Digital Transformation. So he's got this dual title. There are obviously a number of deputy ministers who are responsible for European integration or things like working with the businesses or international collaborations, things like that. So there's a number of deputies. We have the Diia company. So Diia itself, in a way, it's registered as a state enterprise, which is also quite a unique thing that allows it to continue being affiliated with the state and function as a state organization, but at the same time enjoy all the benefits of being kind of quite a lean culture, fast-moving organization, and not necessarily be bogged down by a more traditional government structure and hierarchies, which is quite interesting. And then underneath this, we have more regional. So you see this kind of dotted line, which is we've got on the top central branch, and at the bottom we have the regional branch. So part of the strategy and the kind of this digital leadership thinking behind the success of Diia has been having this network of CDTOs, so Chief Digital Transformation Officers, not just at the very top level, right, where we're talking about the kind of ministerial level, but actually having appointed a number of heads and deputy heads of regional state administrations. And all of this has also been underpinned by another quite interesting story and case of CDTO Campus, which is a whole educational offering that the Ukrainian government in collaboration with a number of international partners and funders, continues to grow, ensuring that these CDTOs are continuously learning, skilling up. They're part of a global kind of ecosystem. And this again goes all the way from those sitting in Kiev and kind of doing work centrally to people who are responsible for a more local from others, right? So this kind of very decentralized, spread out, skilled kind of group of people who are starting to create that digital transformation on the ground, which is obviously, to those of you who research change or transformation, we know how important that buy-in and being embedded with the local communities is. So let me show you a couple of kind of key milestones. I mean, I'll talk a bit more about the case that I'm writing later on, but at the moment, to give you a scale of how much context and so these key milestones there are, the case that I've got at the moment is about 18 pages long. So there's so many different decisions and so many different things that you can be dissecting and studying. This is just a kind of small glimpse, right? Digitization, and by the way, I don't know whether colleagues would use both terms. As an information systems scholar, we would distinguish digitization, meaning conversion from analog into digital, right? Like scanning your receipt to be able to expense it, versus digitalization. So converting the entire process and transforming the entire process through the means of digital. So the digitization of Ukraine started in 2012 and then was massively accelerated by President Zelensky's kind of philosophy. And actually, this was a big part of his presidential race and campaign, and a big promise of a smartphone, a state in a smartphone, right? Digitizing Ukraine, bringing it into sort of the 21st century, if you like. And with this kind of philosophy and strategy, the Ministry of Digital Transformation was established in 2019. Again, if we're looking at where we are now, it's quite a new institution, right? So for them to be able to have achieved so much, certainly for me, it was quite spectacular. And then, as I mentioned, this role of CDTO was introduced across all different government agencies, not just at the very top, with deputies appointed across different local levels. One of the key things is also, I understand the back end less, I have to say, than the kind of people side of things, but this is a very critical thing here. The system of Trimbita, which was another little feature of app that was collaboratively developed with our Estonian colleagues. They have a similar system called X-Road, but Ukraine developed its own called Trimbita, which is basically a musical instrument. I don't know why they've chosen it, I must look it up. So they've taken the experience of Estonia and developed a unique system for Ukraine, taking into account Ukrainian kind of circumstances and conditions. It was introduced in 2018 to support the decentralization of some of those communications, and of course to protect the data exchanges, to secure the data transmission, the storage, to enable digital signatures. Digital signatures, or podpis, is one of the mostly used features. So for example, on a day-to-day basis in Ukraine right now, there are a number of petitions to action on different causes. And so I can very easily, being in the UK or in Canada, can authorize my profile through Diia and then offer an e-signature to a particular petition in Ukraine, so continue being part of kind of co-creation and participate as a citizen. So all of that has been enabled by System Trimbita. So when that was introduced, that was a really big deal. And Diia in itself as a platform, as an ecosystem, was introduced on the 6th of February 2020. Some of the key things, again, when you look at the story of Diia, the different kind of steps and almost like guerrilla marketing tactics that we use are really, really fun. So there are some stories around how people were nudged to buy alcohol with Diia to prove their age, or things like showing your driving license in different places and how the police force was trained to accept the digital versions, for example. Obviously, COVID has also played a big part, right? We've all had to contend with COVID certificates and proving status and where we were in different ways. So Diia both enabled Ukraine to be able to do that very quickly, and equally having that kind of digital communication with the government has accelerated the growth of the app as well. And being Europeans, I don't know to what extent folks know about Eurovision here. Like, personally, I'm a huge fan. It's a big deal in Ukraine every year. we vote, there's a whole competition about who's going to represent the country, and it's always a big deal on social media. But again, being able to vote for the artist you wanted to represent the country on the app, being able to stream Eurovision wherever you are in the world, right, to support Ukrainian artists and to be able to join that global community was another big part of it, onboarding more people and getting more people to try the app with the ecosystem with, you know, something seemingly silly, but then actually see, okay, this is something that I could really benefit from. And particularly targeting, you know, different groups of people from different parts of the country. And crucially, a week before the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the government passed a law on cloud services, which has allowed and enabled a lot of that resilience to move a lot of the records, a lot of the data onto the cloud and preserve the functioning of the government, the functioning of many services, even in the face of kind of physical destruction and critical infrastructure destruction. And what's interesting, again, a lot of people, when they hear about the case of Diia, they immediately assume that the full-scale invasion would kind of stop a lot of that progress, but actually 90+ services, new services were introduced when the full-scale invasion started. Again, I mentioned the kind of case of people potentially losing their physical documents, right, and how much Diia has allowed to support that resilience. So a number of different services were introduced very quickly to help people move, get access to help, get access to a number of different services. And as I mentioned earlier, in April 2024, Diia opened its code globally, run and continues to run a number of hackathon and kind of hacking competitions to continue stress testing the system, to continue sharing the lessons with the global community, which is fantastic. And a lot of this has been underpinned also by a comprehensive policy reform. So I mentioned the cloud bill, but also the kind of how the government has structured different people working on different levels of the government. And also the win-win 2030 strategy. Again, if colleagues are really interested in this case, I definitely recommend looking it up. There's a number of different centers of excellency that have been established, again, conducting research, policy briefings that underpin kind of where Ukraine is headed in terms of not just digital, but its more comprehensive innovation strategy towards a 2030 vision. And of course, I can't speak about this case without acknowledging the international support, both funding, from different governments. Estonia, obviously I mentioned Switzerland, the government of Switzerland has done a lot of work, USAID, of course, UK governments. So there's a number of different programs around knowledge exchange and international support that have enabled for this fantastic ecosystem to exist. And crucially, and this is where I'm starting to show a bit more of where I'm taking you on this kind of design thinking, human-centered side of the story, is the human-first strategy. So all across the development of the app, and this continues to be kind of a key motto of the ministry and people involved, is this idea of human-first strategy. I know I'm kind of, I think I'm doing okay on time still, but I'm just gonna dip our toes into a little bit of this idea of design and human-centered design and design thinking. So firstly, when people hear about the word design, they start assuming I'm talking about, you know, designing a chair or designing something beautiful and shiny and an artifact. But actually, when we're talking about design, we mean decision-making, right? Really intentionally thinking about a particular decision that allows us to move that project or that initiative in a specific direction, right? And actually, most things are designed. We don't really think about it in that way, but most things are designed. And what's interesting for me, as a researcher, as an academic, about the case of Diia is this kind of human centricity, how this human first strategy and how this interesting human-centered decision-making has allowed to get to where we've gotten to in terms of the success and the ubiquity of this app. So when I talk about design thinking or human-centered design, I talk about a number of steps, a methodology or a process, right? So to visualize design thinking process, you've got to look at 5 different steps. This is one of the many different visualizations. I like to use this one because it's quite simple and quite vanilla, if you like. But there are a number of different visualizations and definitions. If you, again, are interested in this topic, I'm more than happy to have a chat and share more. There are some where you'll see 3 stages, some where you see 7, but I think this one is quite nice and neat. So you start with empathy. You start by asking really in-depth questions about the people you're trying to impact. What are their needs? What are we trying to understand? What is the problem? What are their pains? What's standing in the way? What are the jobs that are trying to achieve, right? We're really digging deep into the needs of the people. We're empathizing. We're trying to walk in their shoes. We then move into the stage of define. This is a really crucial one because it's all about sharpening the key questions. Very often when we are dealing with an innovation challenge, we will jump into to tackling that challenge with existing knowledge, with expertise, with ideas already, right? Instead of sort of pausing or thinking a little bit about what is it that we're actually solving. And at this define stage, this is where we start to think about our biases, preconceived assumptions, again, expertise that may be clouding our judgment, that doesn't allow us to see different and new perspectives. So this is a really crucial step where we frame and reframe that key challenge or that key problem that we're working on. Well, only then we move into the ideate. So a lot of the time, if I was to ask you to think about kind of a project management scenario, right, or any group project or a team project, what is the first thing people do? They normally sit down at the table and they start brainstorming straight away, right, throwing ideas out. So this is how design thinking differs in a way, because before we get to the idea, we have to really ask these big important questions and check what we know and what we don't know and fill those knowledge gaps before we move on to creating ideas. So once we get to the ideate stage, we then move to prototype. So we take some of those ideas that we've created with our community and we build low fidelity, quick representations of those ideas, right? So again, very often when you talk about design, we're assuming an artifact or an object, but we can prototype services, we can prototype experiences, we can prototype all sorts of ideas. It doesn't just have to be physical, but we build very quickly in a very low cost way representations of those ideas, and then we test them. So we take them back to the people we're trying to impact and we show them those ideas, we get them to interact with those ideas, and then we get feedback again. So even though empathy is a kind of key critical step in the beginning, it continues to be the running thread across the whole process, because it's all about constantly checking, are we actually speaking the language of the people? Are we meeting their needs? Are we focusing on what's important? Or are we following, you know, the hype or the latest technology or whatever we think is important or whatever? So to give you an idea of how design thinking differs from a more classic, typical management approach, right? Our starting point in its more typical management approach is problem solving, right? So we have an opportunity, let's exploit it. With design thinking, it's all about that framing and reframing. It's thinking about the cause. What is causing, what is generating this problem or this opportunity? So we start in a very different way. With typical management approach, we use inductive and deductive, right? Kind of logic, so what is and why. With design thinking, it's what if. It's opening that space of possibility, really opening up, again, those assumptions and biases, questioning things in a more broader way. We're more interested in users in that context. That's also really important, right? Because context really determines people's behaviors and needs and what they might need at that particular point. It's not just about product, service, technology, or features, which is often, again, where people get bogged down and sort of go in completely the wrong direction in terms of creating innovations that don't serve the people. The process is more iterative and more experimental. It's not linear in that way. I know I've just presented a framework that looks very linear. In reality, it's a lot more iterative and backwards and forwards. It's more about collaboration with different people. It's not just about that functional expertise. We're not just working HR people with HR people and, you know, ops people with ops people. It's about getting a cross-functional team that can tackle these interdisciplinary challenges. And interestingly, the evidence isn't just quantitative, which is what the typical management approach respects and appreciates and sort of prioritizes. Here we're interested also in visuals, we're interested in stories and storytelling, we're interested in narratives, we're interested in asking why a lot, right? So when people tell us, I don't go to the gym because I'm tired, and then we go, oh, people are too tired to exercise, right? We go, why? And why is it that you're tired? And why is it difficult to fit that into your routine? And what about, you know, I don't know, having a 9 to 5 makes it challenging too. So you dig slightly deeper into the kind of rooting causes of things. And we also don't, you know, we also kind of have a critical lens on design thinking as well. By the way, right, like UI, user interface, something can look really beautiful, and then the UX, user experience, in reality, as we start engaging with something, it's less of a favorable experience, sometimes even dangerous experience, right? Again, in the context of Diia and the cyber security and the kind of security and the threat that it could potentially represent, as well as a resilience piece, we've got to be really careful. So again, when we talk about design, we have to distinguish the design with a capital D, which is all about the object, the shiny, the beautiful, with the design with a capital D. That's the process. That's how we approach things. That's how we do an inquiry, how we do research, how we work with different people. It's all about that approach. And even a lot of my research is about how design thinking is actually a mindset. It's a point of reference rather than a methodology or a toolkit. So we've got to treat it as that approach. It's not a tool for consumerism. This is another thing where design can sometimes be criticized. Apple is one of those cases. Let's tweak that feature ever so slightly, make it shinier, hype it up on social media, and then sell you more stuff for more money. So design thinking, to me, when used well and used in the right context, this can be an antidote to it, right? Because we are actually presenting and designing something that people need and want and will use, rather than just flogging something that will get us more money. It's also a misnomer. So we say design thinking, but it's a lot more about doing, getting stuck in, not just doing lots and lots of research that paralyzes us or kind of stops us from taking action. Thinking is an important part of the process, but it's also about doing. And there's a difference between designing and thinking about the people. So this is what I often see when I teach students from engineering backgrounds or STEM backgrounds in particular. They've all been trained in designing, but they haven't been trained in thinking about the people. And this is another kind of key distinctive thing about design thinking. And crucially for me, this is like, I always say to my students, if you remember one thing from this program, I want you to remember this: it's with, not just for, or not just to. To those of you who work in kind of social innovation spaces, you'll know how many innovations have failed because some expert came into a community and said, here's the solution, and actually doesn't take into account any of the local wisdom or any of the local knowledge. It doesn't appreciate the context, and it fails. So with design thinking, what we are attempting to do is we want to design with the people, not just for them or to them. That's a really important distinction. And for me, what I also find interesting, and this is where I'm starting to get to a closing of my talk today, is looking at the impact across micro, meso, and macro levels. So this applies both to policy level, this applies to how we look at digital innovation and digital transformation, this applies to any kind of engagement with people, right? So we can start with the micro, which is all about that's the individual, the product, the service, the artifact, the interaction. We then move into the meso, right? So this is the strategy, governance, policy, organizations, institutions level. And we then get to macro, which is all about the bigger systems, the communities, that kind of national level strategy. So whenever I teach, for example, design thinking or digital innovation, we have lots of cases of the micro and the meso, right? There's so many different fantastic organizations that are super innovative and do great things, but we don't have that many great cases of the macro. I mean, we have a lot of cases, but a lot of them are failures. So over the last few weeks, I've been looking, for example, at the case of the Phoenix space system in Canada, right, where we that's exactly the reaction I was hoping for. We have a little bit of the opposite of that human centricity, right? But it's really helpful for us to have these macro cases and actually have a more successful macro case so that we can teach about these methodologies and about human-centered policymaking, human-centered strategy that represents how you can actually design change and design innovation at a bigger scale. So this has been kind of the key thing I've been thinking about and researching and talking about during my time here as a scholar. So the two things that I'm going to be leaving behind, so to speak, is a case study with a focus on Diia, but specifically the e-enemy functionality of the case, or Diia, the feature that was introduced after the full-scale invasion. Writing case in 1,500 words is a challenge and a half, I'll tell you that. I started going, oh, I've got lots of space, and then it's like, oh my God, how do I condense these 18 pages into 1.5? So picking the best bits and focusing on the enemy, and hoping that that case can be used in some of the governance teaching within the school and more broadly, right? Sharing those lessons of the training of digital governance. And then the second piece is also a paper focused a bit more on kind of layering digital innovation. And in the paper, I'll be talking a bit more about concepts like generativity, service dominant logic, bits that are a bit more from my kind of information systems management background and what they mean and why policymakers should understand them when they're thinking about policy and digital transformation. So layering governance, digital innovation, policy making with design thinking and human-centered design, and really presenting, it's not going to be a kind of data-driven paper, it's more of a thought leadership provocation, if you like, using Phoenix Space System as a case alongside Diia, and asking what if policymakers thought more like designers? Why is that important? Why should we be championing more of that thinking? So these are the sorts of things that I've been working on. I'm hoping that we can share them very soon, kind of review process pending, and if I can fit into the requirements of the word count. But that's all I wanted to share for today, and I'd love for us to have a bit more of a discussion and ask any questions if you have. And a kind of parting word, or the final bit that I wanted to leave with you is policy is designed for the real world. So it's time we treated it as such. Let's start to think a little bit more about people rather than expertise or teams or geopolitical interests. Thank you so much for listening, and I'd love to take some questions and comments.